Yes. Last evening in the talk, we did a little bit of mentioning different types of healing. We mostly spoke about bottom-up healing, but we did talk about a little bit of top-down healing. And at the very end, we said something that there are very high forms of healing, and then we quit. And that was something of a tease, but it is an excellent segue into this talk. We're trying tonight to talk about healing itself, spiritual healing. And Max Heindel says that there are 3 things requisite to having a successful healing. The first of them is healing power. The second of them is a qualified healer. And the third of them is an obedient patient. And so for the next few minutes, we're going to go back and forth looking at these 3 factors as we bring other things out about healing. The healing power, that first factor, should be no problem, because there should be unlimited power available to us. And this is true almost no matter what plane one is drawing the healing energy from. Whether you're drawing it out of the ethers, or whether you're doing thought healing, or especially if you're doing life spirit healing, there is no limitation. The Rosicrucian Fellowship tells us that we should draw on the region of life spirit, which is not only transcendently unlimited, it is perfectly adapted for healing. I shouldn't even say adapted, it's perfectly suited for healing. The life spirit represents the second part of the Godhead, which is the Redeemer or the Savior. And so that spiritual state or that spiritual stuff is perfect for healing as a form of redemption. The same is true of thought healing or of etheric healing. We live, actually, in an ocean of healing stuff. And all we have to do is to be able to draw on it. So, there's plenty of healing power, and the onus then falls on the qualified healer, which is the second factor. Qualification is not a matter of certification. It is a matter of ability. And ability is determined by life. Just as we mentioned when we talked about initiation in an earlier talk, one must be able to reach any given plane and resonate with it in order to be able to draw the power from that plane. Corollary to this, it's obvious that anyone who is an initiate should automatically be a healer, because that initiate has been attuned to a higher plane and can function in it, and it can utilize the stuff. In saying all of this, it's important to remember that we are extremely young in our creative life, in our waking conscious life. In the evolutionary creation, we're just beginners. And this is so pretty much even for an initiate. So healing power is not always easy to come by. It's not just there so easy. It takes enormous amounts of inner work. It means that we have to have almost endless patience, and we have to work very hard to even get a glimpse of the higher realms. To say nothing of being able to reach those higher realms, and from those higher realms draw material and be able to manipulate that material. Everyone who is a Christian initiate should be able to reach the region of life spirit. Because in the Christian mystic initiation, beside going through a very, very severe retrospection, as much as you can handle, a part of the Christian initiation is that one knows one's self, with a capital S. And one knows oneself relative to the stuff that self is made out of. And self is made out of selfness. And that selfness is another name for life spirit. So everyone who receives the Christian mystic initiation has some experience of self relative to life spirit, relative to the realm of Christ. So each person should be able to reach that. That's why part of the reason why they are healers. There's a positive side to this, because it means that in the process of healing, we draw very good things through our aura. You know, we often in our desire bodies, we carry around a lot of negative desires, which we eventually clean up, but there's less likelihood of them to bother us if the majority of our emotional consciousness is based on love. So the positive side of this is that anyone who is doing inner healing work and drawing on higher things is going to have a desire body that has a lot of very good stuff to it. There's also a negative side to this, because there are things that one must not do to be a healer. We have to be able to curb anything that is damaging or destructive in our thinking. When we use healing power, we direct by thought. And that's the same kind of thought that can heal or restore, which can be quickly turned into something that's destructive. So unless we are in control of our emotions, we can become very, very destructive people. So we can see that it's no wonder that there are very few true healers around. There are a lot of professors, but there are very few possessors, as the old statement goes. Fortunately, all of us can be positive some of the time. And all of us can be compassionate some of the time. And we can do so in an increasing amount of our life. And that means when we are in that state, we can participate in healing work. One thing that should be obvious from all of this is that when we do healing, the healing comes through living beings. This is really important because there's a lot of psychotechnology out there. And there are people that would have all kinds of healing machines, much of which is things are bogus. And I'm not talking about exercise machines or whirlpool baths or anything like that. We're talking about people who are trying to work with magnets and technocracy and things like that. That's not the same thing. some of those things have effects, and some of those effects are positive in the physical body, but it's a small positivity, and it isn't always a lasting positivity, but we'll come to that in a little bit. It's not the same as living, healing stuff which comes through living beings. We are the beings that are self-conscious in this world that can bring that through. And, you can't make a machine to do the healing prayer for you. You have to do it yourself.
So somebody might invent one.
I suppose people might do that, but I think that's what we do at the Vulcan period when we bring minerals to the state that they can do things like that. Now, there's a whole lot more that we could say about this, but there's too little time. So it's time to go on to the third factor for a little bit. And let's turn then to the obedient patient. Healing, no matter what kind of force is being used, that force is extremely valuable. Anyone who has ever worked at trying to generate that healing force knows just how precious it is, because it's not an easy task to develop it. It requires a lot of patience, and it requires a sustained intensity of emotion. We have to feel compassion, we have to feel the pain of others, and simultaneously we have to have faith. We have to feel that there is something that can heal those things. It's too valuable to waste. And with that kind of statement, when we're talking about wasting, we're not saying that any human being is unworthy of being healed, because everyone is worthy of being healed. But the healing force is not going to be used, because it is so precious and so rare and there's so little bit of it, if its effects are going to be reversed immediately. Healing is not just a matter of taking away suffering, the suffering that comes when we fall out of harmony. It has something to do with bringing the person back into harmony. And the person has to participate in that. It isn't like medicine, you just go to the doctor and the only duty that you have is you take your pills and that's it. As we know, sickness and suffering are a result of our own deeds. Therefore, it shouldn't be surprising to us that our own deeds are partially required for us to be healed. If we take away someone's symptoms, which can be done, and they haven't been obedient in the process of changing their attitudes and their behavior, they're going to revert back to old ways, or they're going to become complacent, and soon the condition will be returned. And if it returns after you have once been healed, that's a pretty heavy thing that you've taken on to yourself. Christ talks about that in healings in the Bible, saying, like, don't do this again, because if you do, it's going to be many times worse, because you have had the privilege of the right of being healed, and you haven't, it hasn't taken with you. We never know for certain whether a person is obedient enough. It is intimated by Max Heindel that even the elder brothers don't know for certain whether healing is going to take, or if someone is given a trial for initiation, whether they are going to pass it or not. We are positive, so we give everybody the benefit of the doubt as much as we possibly can. We give everybody a break. And that's what grace is. Grace is receiving a break that we didn't deserve. We were given for the sake of grace. For its own sake, loving grace was given to us. That's really giving a break. But that doesn't mean that we have to give that healing grace to someone where it's obvious that they're not going to use it right. It takes very great wisdom to know when a person is ripe and ready for healing. It's the kind of wisdom that I don't have. It takes something much, much greater than me. Christ Jesus, in His healings, does this. He asks the patient to do something, or He tells them to do something. And in some cases, they aren't healed until they finally get around to doing it. A lot can be learned about healing just by reading the Gospels. And it's possible now to do that quite easily. There are sites that you can get on, and just recently I went through 19 different versions of the same Bible verses, and they all got it wrong every time. All because they allowed doctrine to get into the way that they looked at the meaning of a word rather than taking the other meaning, which is just as valid as the one they took. It's crazy how things like that go. But you can get on a website and just go through all of the Gospels. You can pick out which Bible you want to use, and there are quite a few Bibles. And you just type in the word healing, and it'll tell you every place where the word healing is used in the Gospels. And if you go and read all of those passages, you learn a lot about healing. For example, one Christian mystic found that in St. Mark's Gospel, almost all the healings were done right after sunset, when the sun is in the 6th house, and the person is most open to remedy. So there's a lot of these kinds of things that if we want to heal, there's a lot of places that we can learn. Gold is a very valuable substance. If we have a ladle of molten gold, we don't pour it on the ground to produce an amorphous and useless form. We pour it into a pre-prepared mold in order to make something that we can use or to make something that is beautiful or both. Healing substance is much more precious than gold, and it is to be used without waste, and that requires a pre-prepared form, whether it be just a receptive attitude or maybe an image of health, or learning to think positive thoughts that would work with grace. I don't know what's going on. I'm undergoing a cleansing because I'm living so strictly. It's unbelievable. So this is part of what is meant by an obedient patient. Someone who by their life and by their inner work can make a form that is likely to receive the healing grace. Another part of obedience is much more general. It's much more fundamental. Ever since part of our life, under the influence of the Lucifer spirits, the divine rebels, we have fallen. And the primary act, as described in the Bible, which is one description of it, is that it was called an act of divine disobedience. And this means, obviously, that if we want to come into concord with divine harmony, we must reinstitute some kind of obedience. Obedience to the spiritual laws of the cosmos. And since we are now free people, and since we on our own chose to be disobedient, our return to obedience must also be voluntary. So this doesn't mean that we have to take orders from everyone in the world, though it may mean that from time to time. And it doesn't mean that we have to be led around willy-nilly and everything. But it does mean that we have to humbly submit to wisdom. And mostly, we have to submit ourselves to the dictates of the self within us, so that we're not acting from our personality and false ego, but that we are acting in obedience to the wisdom part of our being. Now, this isn't surprising, because it was the selfish hope for immortality that got us into a position that we listened for the Lucifers. So if we have loving obedience to the Christ within, this isn't such a bad thing, and it isn't such a different thing. Now, in looking at the components of healing that we have introduced, we can see that there are some basic problems in healing. And now it's time to see how the Rosicrucian Fellowship healing methods deal with those problems. The Rosicrucian Fellowship is an outer organization. It is a prep school. It prepares us for the Rosicrucian Order, which is an inner world organization of initiates to the mysteries. In the broad sense, the Rosicrucian movement, inward and outward, does most of its healing by invisible helper healing. The term invisible helper, I guess, needs some introduction. And an invisible helper is any being working together for healing from the worlds that we cannot see with our eyes. This includes, for example, angels. It includes certainly people who are high adepts who can leave their body consciously. Even an initiate is automatically an invisible helper if they're in the Rosicrucian order. It includes people from among the dead who have enough soul power and enough self-control to help in that work. And it includes ordinary people like you and I. But there is some responsibility for us if we are going to be invisible helpers. And this is a real privilege to work as an invisible helper. First of all, we must have the intent, and to some extent we must be turned out in that intent to be loving and compassionate. We have to really care about other people. Care about them more than we care about ourselves. An invisible helper, or a candidate to be an invisible helper, must have a reasonably pure desire nature. Because without that, if one finds oneself in the desire world and there are currents, say for example, of sensual desire, you will be pulled away very easily. And one must take care of one's own dense physical body. Because if you don't fulfill the duties to your physical body, you have to stay with it at night when you're asleep. In this case, we're talking about ordinary people who, when they have gone to sleep, either consciously or unconsciously or semi-consciously, work with the invisible helpers and leave the biological ethers of their vital bodies behind to take care of the physical body, and they work with the invisible helper corps. For example, if one has an acute and serious illness, one cannot function at that time as an invisible helper because it's critical. And the presence of the being with their body is important to healing. One cannot be an invisible helper if one has a huge heavy meal right before bedtime, because you have to hang around then and that has to be digested and you have to be with that. One cannot be an invisible helper if one goes to bed in anger, or if one is upset or fearful or has all kinds of negative emotions like that, because they stay in the desire body, and then when you're out of the body, you're drawn to places in the desire world where those things are manifest. One cannot be an invisible helper if one spends too much time at going to bedtime thinking about tomorrow. Because when you think forward, you grind yourself into the physical body more. And there's a cling so that you can't really leave the body. You know that when you do things backwards, it takes you out of the body. This is what hypnotists do when they take you out of the body. Retrospection is perfect because it calms down our emotions, it gives us a little bit more soul power, and it unloosens us from our grip on the material world. So that's the most ideal thing that we can do. If we find that for some reason whatsoever that we can't do it, and there are very few reasons why we can't do it, the next best thing to do in lieu of retrospection is to pray ourselves to sleep. Now, invisible helper healing has some interesting questions about it. People often ask, they're curious, and they have a question, and I think it's a very good question. And they ask, why does the Rosicrucian Fellowship put so much emphasis on invisible helper healing? Why not instead work on this realm? Spending time helping people to learn how to pray, spending a lot of time helping people to become magnetic healers or something like that. Why do you spend all this energy on invisible helper healing? Those are valid questions, and let's try to answer them for a few minutes. And let's do that by working in reverse order with the same three things. Let's begin with looking at an obedient patient. Now, just because someone asks us for healing, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're an obedient patient. It might just mean that they're selfish. I want relief. Please heal me. And then not really care about others or not do anything to take care of themselves. Sometimes we're disobedient and we do things despite ourselves. We're divided beings, and we have an internal struggle. And it's not clear who always has control of the dense physical body. We know that we have this false ego, which is in our desire nature, and it struggles with the true self. And what is the struggle over? It's over the dense physical body. The dense physical body is the prize. And the reason why is because the dense physical body is where we have the waking consciousness. That's the joy thing. Not only that, it is the place where conscious soul is developed. So in order to wake up, we have to have experiences here. In order to come to full spiritual power, we have to reap conscious soul from this plane. So the people who think about withdrawing from the material world and not having material experiences in the material world, they are not going to have optimal spiritual growth. Spiritual growth is much different than spiritual unfolding. Spiritual unfolding is only one part of it. There has to be growth, and there has to be food for that growth, and that food for that growth is soul experience. So we have this false ego. And this false ego has become a pretty nasty thing. We fell innocently, but we made the mistake. We fell for what the Lucifer spirits told us. And then after we had the lower nature to protect ourselves until the spirit could come in and take over, the Lucifers figured out that they could cajole or they could tempt that lower nature into itself continuing the rebellion. It set up shop for itself in our desire body, and it's got a pretty good thing going. Because because we're not conscious of it. We have this personal unconsciousness of it. We recognize that there's something in us that we don't like. But that within us that we don't like, that hasn't been tamed, that's awfully cunning. I usually recommend that people read Psychopathology in Everyday Life by Sigmund Freud, because if you take that and adapt it to the inner struggle, you can understand a lot of things that are going on inside of yourself. It's a very helpful thing to do. Well, the Lucifer spirits were so successful that most people have a conception of themselves more as the lower nature than as the true self, which works through that same inner consciousness to waking consciousness here. In fact, they're so successful that things that really do come from the true self, we say they came from God. Like Beethoven said, his music came from God because he didn't know. He was right in a way, but it was the God within. It wasn't the Almighty that his music came from. He realized it was a divine gift, but that divine gift he never realized was himself. Just as Christ says in the Bible, do you not know it is written that ye are gods? The true self that works through and with or around the lower nature is divine. And it's also internal. But it has to be manifest as itself, for itself, and not through our petty conceptions of it. When we do try to act on intuitive impulses that come from our divine being, there's resistance from the lower nature. This we know from experience. We have a very excellent statement of it in St. Paul, where he says, with poetic beauty, the good that I would, I do not. But that which I would not, that do I. And we've all gone through that. We've done all kinds of, we can even set ourselves up and say, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that, I'm not going to do that. I do it. We get confident when we tell ourselves that what we're going to be able to do. So this problem is pretty obvious. In order to be healed, which is to be whole, there has to be a change in attitude. A top-down change in attitude which accompanies the change in symptom, which comes bottom-up. So no bona fide healer is ever going to waste priceless healing energy changing symptoms that are going to be reversed because there has not been a change in attitude. However, if there's too much resistance, which is often the case, there's going to be no change in attitude. Now we're not talking about an entire remake of the whole consciousness, That's too big to ask. Sometimes to just make a minimal change in the attitude that is behind the illness, particular illness that we're suffering through is enough. And sometimes, it doesn't have to be a major Herculean effort to make a change in character. Sometimes just striving to improve a little bit, one day at a time style, is enough. And, then the person is open and can be healed. So let's take a simple example of this. Suppose somebody comes to us and they say they're suffering from back pains and they occasionally have those shooting pains of sciatica. Not always, but very often, those are symptoms of someone with excessive pride, especially pride in the amount of work that one can do. Now, you're the healer. And if you try to get this across to the person, and the person has a lot of pride, you're going to run into a lot of resistance. A proud person is not going to back down. And it might even make things worse because the person might take offense at it and dig in even more. They might consider it a challenge to their personal sovereignty. Now, it's much different when both the healer and the patient are away from the body. Because they're not struggling for the prize. The prize is the consciousness in the dense physical body. So when one is not so identified with the personality, when one is not egoistic about the personality, it's much easier to be persuasive. And in general, there are terrible low areas in the desire world, but the whole desire world is permeated with love. Even the lowest regions have love in it, in their being. And so, there is something that is healing when a person is apart from the body. And consequently, that individual is much more open and much more approachable. Now, if a communication is given to a person in such circumstances, it's much more likely to take. And it's much more likely to find acceptance. Then maybe a day or two later, a person is in the body and they're doing something. They're not too busy. Maybe they're washing dishes or cleaning up or doing something like that. Their mind isn't fully occupied. And they might say to themselves, I think I've been too proud. And when that happens, the higher part of them knows this now. And when this happens, then you have a more obedient patient. You have someone who is ready for invisible helper healing. Sometimes recognition is enough. Recognition and remorse is even better. And recognition and remorse and reformation are better yet. And if you can add another R in there for restitution, you've got an unbelievable combination. So this shows the obvious advantages of invisible helper healing. When somebody asks, it's like giving them a card, come and visit, and then you can go and visit when you're out of the body. You may not remember it yourself in the morning. That's all right too, because if you remember too much and you remember it with waking consciousness and that waking consciousness is not yet purified, you might get awfully egoistic about that. So it's all right for us to be a little bit unconscious as long as we're working on waking consciousness all the time. Now there are a number of other good sound reasons for invisible helper healing. Enough for several talks, but we don't have time for several talks. We are probably going to run a little longer tonight. Now let's look at this same thing, invisible helper healing, from the viewpoint of the healer. There are many reasons why invisible helper healing is good for the healer. One is that it's educational for the healer in ways that are much different than the education we have here. Because in the same way that the patient is more receptive, the agent is also more receptive. And we all need education. In the morning talks, we've been talking a lot about physiology. And if you're working with a leader of an invisible helper group, that leader of that invisible helper group can actually show you the body live so that you can see what's going on in the body, and you can see it much better than any kind of CAT scan or anything like that, because you're seeing the real thing right there with perception. If you want to be a helper, your consciousness from time to time will be raised so that you can learn these things. This is a tremendously, and it's hands-on education. I had a friend once that had a remembrance of a Desire World invisible helper experience. A whole bunch of people were making a painting, but they were making a painting without a paintbrush or without paints. What it was is that everybody knew that what their emotions were what the color was going to be that they put in their part of the painting. And there was an archetypal idea of what the painting was going to be. And the person said, I was doing all right for a while, and then I decided to look and see how well other people were doing. You know how we like to compare ourselves. The person got all screwed up and then screwed up the whole painting for everyone else. A very excellent kind of example for someone to learn in a hands-on way where there's no doubt about what you have or haven't done. And then there is the healing panacea. This is that invaluable golden substance that we talked about earlier. It is made by the concentrated, deep, sacrificial prayers of many people. The elder brothers, though they are profoundly adept at spiritual things, can't do it alone. Each and every one of us has to contribute to the production of the panacea. It is something that is like a magnetic fluid liquid gold. It is something that when applied causes miraculous changes. I believe that this is what the alchemists referred to as the oil of gold. I had a friend that many years ago told me, when I was living at Mount Ecclesia, told me of an invisible helper waking state or semi-waking state, and that person said that they were able to handle and apply the panacea to someone with miraculous effect, and to just be able to have the opportunity to do that one time in life had that person in tears for years afterwards with the flashback memories of having that opportunity. We're talking about something really precious, and there's scarce little of it. And so, the invisible helper, when they're out of the body, they They don't have the life ether part of the body with them, so they can't give a charge from their own body. But they can magnetically manipulate and deliver panacea. Another value to invisible helper healing is done much more efficiently out of the body than when one is in the body. Now, just because somebody's out of the body doesn't mean they're automatically a saint. However, many moral dilemmas are much easier dealt with, and the problems of ego are much easier dealt with. When one attempts to become a conscious invisible helper, or when one especially attempts to become an initiate, to leave the body behind and enter the kingdom of the gods, one is proclaiming oneself as a divine being. And when that happens, everything that is in that person gets thrown to the surface. It happens to anyone who becomes a probationary member of the Rosicrucian Fellowship. We're sort of like prisoners. We're on probation. That we have to face, and we have to change these things in ourselves. There's no way we can possibly hope to be healers, to ever be able to deal with that panacea if we haven't made strides in becoming holier, kinder, more loving beings. So we can see why invisible helpership is, from the viewpoint of the healer, is such an important thing. All right. This brings us back to the healing power. The power behind that liquid gold that we have just spoken of. Of course, we're speaking about something from the One, from the central focus of the universal spirit. God, if you feel comfortable using that word. In any case, what we're going to do is we're now going to talk about taking that healing power and bringing it from deep in the spiritual worlds to where we are right here. And to do that, we're going to analyze line by line a sample healing prayer. It doesn't have to, it's a rather, for the purposes of communication or for this delineation, it's a rather cumbersome prayer. And it doesn't have to be real intricate. So let's go and look at this and try to understand the process of getting at the power. The power that does the healing. We don't do the healing. We're just lucky enough to deliver the healing stuff from time to time. All right, let's look at the first phrase. Oh God. It's an obviously for focus. Prayer is a form of deep concentration. And the sooner one gets into focus, the better the chance for success. So with the opening phrase, we're looking for focus. One does not picture a being of God when thinking this thought. The Bible tells us very clearly that God is a spirit and must be worshipped in spirit and in truth. In fact, it is the spirit of spirits. But that spirit of spirits does have a center. It's not a visible center like the center of these circles. It is a center of consciousness. You can close your eyes and you can direct your attention to an individual without seeing that personality of that individual. You know that there's a truth knower out there that you're familiar with, and then you're focusing on that center of being. It's perfectly possible to do that with the center of being of our solar cosmos. It's a difficult thing to do because what it amounts to is looking God in the eye, and that's not easy at all. If you want to see yourself shrink, that's not an easy thing. All right, the next phrase is, according to thy will and thy way. This is to clarify the focus and to produce limits and specificity. The will of God is the limitation. Not our will, but the will of God. And if anything becomes our will and it is not in coincidence with the will of God, it's black magic. The way of God, we know from St. John's Gospel, is the way of Christ, where he says, I am the way. Christ being the representative of the second member of the Godhood. In the life spirit, that is the way that we are doing this. So what we have just said is we are focusing on the center of being, and we are working with its will, and we're working with the way, which is the same way that the universal spirit accomplishes everything. So when the Bible says, ask whatsoever ye will in my name, that's the same thing that we're doing when we say, according to thy way. All right, then we come to something a little bit more difficult. May regenerate and liberate healing power. Now this is a prayer that you can do together with other people, or you can do it alone. But the phrasing is still the same. Because the we, when we say, may we generate and liberate, is you and the center of being. It's not a collection of people outside. It's the most intimate we that there is, the most intimate we that is possible. The healing power spoken of here is life spirit. What we're asking is we're asking for God in the form of life spirit. When we pray and when we give healing to someone, we literally are giving God to them. We're giving God in the form of life spirit, which is one of the highest forms. All creation and redemption, healing included, comes through life spirit. Now, to understand generation and liberation, we have to understand the life spirit a little bit. Life spirit is everywhere. It interpenetrates everything that we know of. It's right here, as well as going all the way to interplanetary space. As Max Heindel used to say, it's closer than hands and feet. Generation and liberation, in this case, in this prayer, are taken verbatim from the healing service as written by Max Heindel. So a question comes up. If life spirit is right here, why does it need generation? And if it's ubiquitous and unconditioned, why does it need liberation? It's the very spirit of freedom. It's liberated. Those are the questions that we have to ask in order for the healing service to make sense to us. Generation, as taught to us by the Rosicrucian philosophy, is the activity of Jehovah, the Holy Spirit, the third member of the Godhood. In humans, the third attribute, which is doing the praying, the self, is the thinker. So generating healing force is a process of thinking. And that's exactly what the Rosicrucian philosophy tells us. Even the healing service tells us that. It tells us that we're creating a thought form which is to be filled in part by life spirit. The Rosicrucian philosophy teaches us that concrete thinking is an evacuation process. That is, we produce a hollow archetype, a hollow thought form, and then that thought form is filled with life spirit. This is how we deliver concentrated, pure life spirit, is by making a vacuum. Truly, all concrete thinking is questioning. If we say, what does this mean? When we ask that, we're forming a thought form. And in that thought form, intuition comes, and that's how we understand something. So we are producing a hollow thought form. But the questioning that is in prayer is a very intense questioning. It's very concentrated in the mental part of it, and the mind is being driven by as intense of feelings as possible. It's very good to suffer, because when we suffer, we feel how other people are suffering, and that drives a really strong prayer, and that allows us to make a very clear vacuum. To the degree that we can concentrate in this way, or that we can question in this way, will we be successful? In physics, we produce a physical vacuum. We use a pump of some kind or another, and we pump out all of the solids, liquids, and gases of a region of space. And all there is in that region of space then is ether, pure ether. We know the ether is there because the light goes through it. When we make a vacuum with thought, we don't need a vacuum pump. The vacuum pump is our thinking process. We do the same thing. We evacuate everything from the concrete realms from an area, and that hollowing out of the concrete realms is a form. We're back to talking about form again. And then that form has nothing but pure life spirit in it. And we do this anticipating that the presence of Christ will be in that. A third part of generation is humanification. The life spirit is lofty and it's pure. It's beyond even ideas. It's beyond anything we can comprehend with our mind. Anyone who has ever experienced it, of any time in history, any religion, anyone who has experienced it has said it is ineffable. But in the process of concentrating and in the process of making the form, it becomes comprehensible. Because the form is made by the human. And then the pure truth goes in that form, and the relationship between the truth and the way that truth was apprehended makes it humanly comprehensible so that a person can understand it. And then there is that curious paradox of liberation. The life spirit's already free. It is the realm of freedom. It doesn't have any kind of conditioning of any kind. Pure love from the life spirit is unconditional, and it's unconditioned. It just loves. That's it. Now, the character of the life spirit is the character of redemptive love. It doesn't live for itself. The selfness of life spirit it has its selfness in loving something of the infinite other. It's purely other in its orientation. And any kind of selfness that you find in life spirit is because it loves the other. Obviously, liberation for life spirit is the opposite of what liberation is for us. We are in all of the bonds and chains of matter and the law and everything else, and we need to be more free. We need to live in the Spirit. But the Spirit that's filled to overflowing with love in itself, for it to be liberated, is to give it something to love. And so, when we liberate the life spirit, we're literally doing that. Because it isn't like the vacuum in the physicist's laboratory. The life spirit really wants to participate in this. And to the degree that we cooperate with it, there's every kind of encouragement is given to us in forming these thoughts that will contain life spirit. Again, there's another analogy to physics. In physics, we know that there's light in the air all over the place, but we can take a lens and we can concentrate it. So the process of generating and liberating life spirit is analogous, but don't take the picture too exactly, to the process of focusing light through a lens. So, we have this way of drawing redemptive love. Alright. Then we come to a rather strange repeat set of phrases. The first one is, thy divine life and light and love healing power. This is not a reminder to the universal spirit. This is a reminder to ourselves. This is what we are addressing ourselves to. We are addressing ourselves to that divine light, the light of truth. We've all had ideas, and when we have an idea, the lights go on. Well, this is the lights without the idea. It's just the pure light, the pure light of truth. The life is what is purpose. The higher we go into the spiritual world, the more purposeful things are. And love has nothing but purpose. So when a lot of people say it in an almost trite way. They say, well, that's life. And what they're not trying to be trite, and they're not trying to just pass it off. What they're trying to say is that there is a purpose that is so big that we can't really understand it. And that is what is meant by life. The stuff of life itself, not necessarily just vitality, but the thing that makes everything live in our consciousness. That's what life spirit is. That's what we're reminding ourselves of in this phrase. The love is obvious. Who needs to say anything about love? It speaks for itself. This is the love that heals everything. Sometimes we can help people a great deal without saying a word. All you have to do is love them, and no matter what their problem is, some people will feel that love, and they know that everything's all right. And so that's what we're addressing in all of this. We're addressing this as a power. And if we're successful, we surely know it. This healing service was written by Max Heindel, who was a Christian initiate, so he had the experience of Christ. And so when they did healing services at Mount Ecclesia, often they would reach the life spirit. And when that came through, everybody had tears streaming down their face because they had been healed in the process of trying to heal others. Now, this life spirit just by itself alone, as this component of the healing force, is perfect for top-down healing. If it's the truth, then if a person has been having wrong thoughts, and they can see their thoughts from the eyes of truth or in the light of truth, that's the beginning of healing right there. You know how you've had some cockamamie thought in your mind and you're absolutely certain of it, and you come back, oh my God, that isn't the truth. When you see the truth, you have that shocking kind of change. And that's how this works in healing the mental part. Obviously, the keynote or the key principle, the attraction that runs throughout the desire world, is love. And if a person gets a dose of this kind of love in their desire body, that goes a long way for healing. Alright, now let's look at the second repetition. And life and light and love, healing energy. There's a space that should be in there before healing. And you note the difference between the two phrases is power versus energy. The prayer shifts at this point. It shifts to a much deeper kind of prayer in a very, very difficult way. Obviously, the energy that we are talking about here is the panacea, the etheric healing panacea. Because if you heal the vital body, the physical body follows right after. The physical body can even be reformed. There can even be regenerations of the physical body. There are on records, people who have therapies that have been able to regenerate things like pieces of arm and things like that. So what we're doing in this part of the prayer, in our consciousness, is we're taking life spirit which we have conceived in our consciousness and have a little glimpse of. We made a little pot to hold it in, and we're transducing it into a vital life panacea. And this is a very hard work. This ether is different from most of the rest of the ethers. In the first place, it's new and it's fresh, and for that reason it has a special potency. So we can see in this that if we're successful with this, we're doing more than just healing. We're bringing about the New Jerusalem. Because when we bring in from life spirit this new ether, we're building the globe E in the evolutionary process. We're preparing the etheric globe for what we're going to live in the next stage. It's beautiful the way things work like that. You do one good thing and a lot of other things are attendant to it. Now, there is a principle in the Rosicrucian philosophy that Max Heindel mentions in several different places. And that is that in involution, in order to develop something, we sacrifice something else. The reason for this is that during involution, we can't do everything. And if we can't do everything, that means we have to set something aside. And the statement that Max Heindel makes is that we sacrifice some evolutionary capabilities, but we get them back later in a much higher form. And this is what we're talking about here. In the moon period, when we were animal-like, we sacrificed plant-like ability. That is, we sacrifice the ability to take light as it comes from the sun, either the desire world sun or now it's the physical world sun, and use that to build and to nourish our vital bodies. We sacrifice that. And we sacrifice that so that we could develop the principle of desire. The vital principle and the desire principle are usually in involution and even in our state antagonistic to each other. So we left that up to the then plants. and we develop the desire body. It's the same thing that's happening right now. If you take a plant grows as long as it lives. If you take an animal grows until it becomes reproductively potent. When it becomes reproductively potent, the desire body is activated, and the desire body then curbs the ability of the vital body to keep on growing and building in that way. And we stay one size. This is what happens to us. We grow to a certain period in life, and after our emotional nature has come into being, we quit growing. Now, so when we're doing healing work, what we're doing is we're taking life spirit, and we're putting it through the lens of mind. And when we put it through the lens of mind, it undergoes an inversion, and it becomes its opposite. It becomes ether, especially life ether. So, this is one of the most futuristic things that we do. But it's very, very hard. Now, we said that we are concentrating into a special focal point. And at various points in the prayer, we focus on the white rose. And we are creating an archetype. In the first part of the prayer, we are bringing the life spirit to be coincident with a white rose. The epitomal white rose in inner space, even though we may have to use a physical one before our eyes to get to that. Now, the Rosicrucian philosophy teaches us that the concrete mind has 3 levels of depth. The continental level, which is the level of thinking about forms. The oceanic level, which is thinking about life. The aerial level, or the aerial region of thought, is thinking about emotions. And then there's that center of centers, the archetypal region, where we think about thought and thinking and truth itself. We as human beings can only think about forms at this point. We can't think life. However, when we enter into this deep concentration, what we are literally doing is we are focusing through form and into the oceanic region. And we are thinking in terms of life. And this is our objective in producing the panacea on the bottom-up level that can do all those miraculous healings in the physical etheric complex. We are transducing life spirit by our concentration, by our penetrating thought. We are thinking it into life, vital life. That's almost impossible to do. At least for we may work in our entire life and not make much progress, but nobody ever said the spiritual life was going to be something easy. Man, there are not a lot of healers walking around on the corner, that you can pick one up at every street corner. There are not people that have that kind of consciousness. And we have the best of all motivation. If somebody's suffering, and it's somebody that we love, that's motivation to really concentrate as deeply as we can. And it's worth taking all the hours of practicing and everything that has to be done in order to make that penetration so that because it doesn't take much. You do a little bit of that and you've really opened up. If you think about it, this is our future. Someday, there will be some little microbe-like thing that will live as long as we can hold our concentration in the oceanic region of the world of thought. We let our mind wander, poof, there it dies. That's the end of its life. So that is what we're trying to do here. This is critical. In terms of healing, If we think about it, somebody might live or somebody might die depending on how well we have applied ourselves to this activity. And if that isn't motivation for deep thinking, I don't know what is. The next phrase is for our friends of the Rosy Cross. This is also mnemonic. This is again to bring the focus back to the rose and to bring both the higher part and the lower part of the healing panacea and to focus it. Well, literally what we have done is we have taken our little glass and we have taken the light of life spirit and focused it on the rose. We have taken our mind and we have focused our attention on the rose in the region of the oceanic region of thought. And we have brought these all to be coincident, and this is how we generate thought, generate healing power. And we make it available. This is what we're trying to do. It's a wonderful thing. It's perfectly acceptable to focus one's heart on the white cross also. You have to be a little bit careful though, because if you get prayers that are too cumbersome, like this one tends to be for many people, and if you're trying to do too many things with your heart and your larynx and concentrate, sometimes that dissipates your concentration. Sometimes it takes a half an hour before you're really warmed up into a deep healing concentration. I think most of us are at the age now where we're at retirement or approaching retirement, so it shouldn't be such a hard thing for us to spend at least an hour a day trying to practice this. It's a wonderful thing. It's a way that you can help other people without sticking your nose in their business. It's a wonderful thing that you can advance spiritually while caring about other people and not for yourself alone. You can't do anything better than this kind of healing prayer. I'm really big on it. And then finally we say, through thy divine love. This means that we are putting this, the divine love is again the life spirit. And in this case we mean the life spirit in a very special way. Because the life spirit is beyond any conceptology. And being beyond conceptology is beyond the concept of space. Therefore, Max Heindel tells us the life spirit can be in two places at the same time. And this is in remembrance of that. We are this do in remembrance of me. We are remembering the life spirit and everything that we have done. And through that, everything is brought to this point of focus. And then finally, we say thank you. And saying thank you is the deal closer. Anytime we create anything by a thought process, whether we're putting a whole bunch of ideas together to come to an idea that we want to make manifest or whatever, the finalizer of it is thank you. It's a realization that it's going to be. It's like Christ at the resurrection of Lazarus, where he says, I'm just saying thank you for the people around me because I know already that it's going to be. And the way we do it is by saying thank you. And that is what accomplishes it. So you can see that developing the panacea is done in a process similar to this. It doesn't have to be exactly the way I've said it. Each person, we're self-reliant. We each find our own way of doing it. And so that's what we're all about. And that's about as much as we have time for, except right now it's time for the final exam. You didn't think you were going to get away without a final exam, did you? The final exam is optional. And the final exam is I'd like to do a very brief healing service. Not more than 10 minutes, while it's fresh in our consciousness of what we're trying to do. So if you're not inclined toward doing healing prayer, that you can leave now. Let's say the Rosicrucian Students' Prayer, and whoever wants to leave can leave, and whoever wants to stay can stay. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and Redeemer. Okay. Everybody staying? Wonderful. My dear friends, may the roses bloom upon your cross.
And upon yours also.
It is our custom to meet here once a week for the purpose of carrying out the second commandment of the Christ, to heal the sick. One coal will not make a fire, but where a number of coals are heaped together, the heat which is latent in each may be kindled into a flame, emitting light and warmth. We are now massing our coals in an endeavor to generate thoughts of help and healing, and to focus them in one common direction, so that they may be made available to help the elder brothers of the Rosicrucian order in their beneficent work for humanity. If we wish to be real helpers in the work which the elder brothers have started, we must make our bodies suitable instruments. We must purify them by clean living, for an unclean vessel cannot contain pure and wholesome water, nor can a spotted lens give a true picture. Neither can pure and strong healing force be sent out from here unless we keep our minds and bodies clean and pure. It is a privilege to be here in the midst of all of these thoughts of love and prayer, and to offer ourselves as channels to receive and liberate the healing force which comes direct from the Father. But before this power can be transmitted, it must have been generated. And to do this efficiently, we should understand accurately what the method is. It is not enough that we know in a vague way of the sickness and suffering which are in the world, and that we have a dim and hazy idea of helping to alleviate this suffering, whether it be bodily or mental. We must do something definite to attain our object. Disease, we may say, is really a fire, the invisible fire which is the Father, endeavoring to break up the crystallized conditions which we have gathered in our bodies. We recognize fever as a fire, but tumors, cancers, and all other diseases are really also the effect of that invisible fire which endeavors to purify the system and free it from the conditions that we have brought about by breaking the laws of nature. This very same power which is endeavoring slowly to purge the body can be greatly augmented by proper concentration. That is what prayer really is, provided we have the proper conditions. To illustrate what these conditions are, we will take the water spout as an example. You may not have seen this phenomenon of nature, but it is wonderful and awe-inspiring. Usually at the time when it occurs, the sky seems to hang very low over the water. There is a tense feeling in the air of depression or concentration. Gradually it seems as if a point in the sky reaches down toward the water, and the waves in a certain spot seem to leap upward until both sky and water meet in a swirling mass. Something similar takes place when a person or a number of persons are in earnest prayer. When a person is intensely in earnest in supplication to a higher power, the aura seems to form itself into a funnel-shaped thing which resembles the lower part of the water spout. This leaps up into space a great distance, and being attuned to the Christ vibration of the interplanetary world of life spirit, it draws thence a divine power, which enters the individual or company and ensouls the thought form which they have created. Thus the object for which they have united will be accomplished. But let this be borne thoroughly in mind, that the process of praying or concentrating is not a cold intellectual process. There must be an amount of feeling adequate to accomplish the desired object, and unless this intensity of feeling is present, the object will not be realized. This is the secret of all the miraculous prayers which have been recorded. The person who prayed for something was always intensely in earnest. The whole being went into the desire for this or that thing for which the person prayed, and thus the individual was lifted up into the very realms of the divine and brought down the response from the Father. Let us now concentrate on the Rosicrucian emblem on the wall. The pure white rose is symbolical of the heart of the invisible helper. The red roses stand for the cleansed blood. The white cross brings to mind the body, and the golden star represents the golden wedding garment which is made by pure living. Let us, by our prayers to the Father, who is the great physician, liberate the force for healing, that we may reach those who are looking to us for help, and also those who may not have been able to ask us for assistance. Let us put all the intensity of feeling possible into this prayer, that we may indeed form a funnel that shall bring down the divine power from the Father. But there is a great danger of misusing this wonderful power. Therefore, we should always qualify our supplications for others with the words of the Christ. Not my will, but thine be done. We will now concentrate for a few minutes upon healing.